we're at time, so I'm going to start just because I don't want to wait any longer. I'm really excited to get this going. It's a little tough to follow Gene Kim, but I'm going to do my best to keep it. I don't know if I can talk as fast as him, but I'll try and keep it interesting. So my talk, it's a very wordy title, but I think it conveys the intent of the talk, which is taking that culture of continuous improvement that we value in Agile teams and blowing it out to the rest of the organization, to bring it to the larger organization past the team. I think it's going to be important for me to also, because I met a bunch of different folks already today who are coming in sort of at different levels of experience and different levels of depth on Agile, to just know, I mean, who would consider themselves sort of Agile novices? They're here to learn about Agile. Okay, nobody. Okay, well that makes it easier. I won't spend a lot of time explaining some concepts like continuous improvement. How many of you are sort of, well, been doing it for a little while, pretty comfortable with it? Okay, and how many of you are level Agile? And if you're re-level Agile, you know what I mean by when I say re-level Agile. Okay, shu ha re, all right, that's the idea. So, all right, thank you, that helps me. So, because I don't need to explain that continuous improvement's a good thing to start out with, let's talk about what continuous improvement actually looks like when it looks beyond the team. For one, it means there's no status quo, right? There's no, that's how we do it here. Everybody's always asking, can we do this better? Now that's great in a retrospective at the end of a sprint. When this is actually how your company works, it's pretty magical. So I came from Spotify to Avvo. Avvo, I should say, we're a legal marketplace. We help people with problems get help for their problems. Primarily legal problems. You'd be surprised how many problems are actually legal problems. And I came from Spotify, having been there for several years. Spotify, when I was there, is a true continuous innovation or continuous improvement culture. And it changed how I thought about the companies that I would want to work for, or the companies that I'd want to work with. When I came to Avvo, I had been living in this world for a while. For those of you who worked waterfall or worked other ways, and all of a sudden you got to work on a really high-performing Agile team, you never want to go back. It's just been so amazing being in that environment that you're done. You're never going to work that way again. For me, that actually, I was lucky. It happened in 2000. We built a company using extreme programming. The book had just come out. I have not gone to work in a non-Agile shop since. And that's what continuous improvement is for me now. I won't go anywhere where I can't either build this culture or be part of this culture. It's that transformative. And it's important because continuous improvement is the soul of Agile, in my opinion, right? We do short iterations, gives us chances to change and improve things lots of times. We're delivering value, we're getting feedback from customers constantly that lets us change and shift and pivot. That's why this is so important to me, especially when you're trying to build Agile companies. Culture of continuous improvement, again, it's where people are adaptable to change, nimble, not just Agile, right? Change happens not just on the team, in the product, but across the organization, and people can just adapt. And it's very hard for people to adapt to change. But this helps them get into that mindset. They become advocates for improvement because they can own the mission and empower or change their own work, right? They're empowered. And that's why I like it, and that's why I like working in those kind of companies. So how do you get there, right? Hopefully it sounds kind of nice, like a place you'd want to work. So the question is, how do you get there? This is where we become a bit of a problem. We're in this talk, which is, I'm not a consultant. I don't go from company to company kind of sprinkling continuous improvement dust on them and making them just become Thank you. I hope you're not a consultant angry at me. Okay. Nothing wrong with consultants. It's just not my skill. I'm the CTO, right? So I'm there for the duration, hopefully. I'm there for a while. So I can't tell you how you can magically do this. I can tell you what we've done and what's worked and what hasn't worked. And you can steal my ideas, put them in your own company, adapt them, change them, remix them. Hopefully it'll give you some ideas on how you can do this. I'm going to talk about my last 15 months at Avvo. Again, just to set the context, right? Because when I hear other people talk and they talk about their company and how great they're doing something, and they're 6 months old or 2 months old or a year old, well, that's nice, but that's not, that's kind of artificial. Avvo's not that. We're a startup, but we're 10 years old, right? We've been around long enough to we know who we are. This is not the way we worked. This is actual transformation and change. The thing that's helped or hurt has been we've had a very rapid growth over the last few years. So there was many years of very steady kind of linear growth. Business was growing, the team was growing. We hit a hockey stick where we had product market fit. All of a sudden the company started growing really fast and hiring in to support and extend that growth. Now, that's where we hit the oh no moment, right? So all of a sudden, everything that used to work well, teams were like super fast and everything was shipping on like really quickly, tons of innovation happening. All of a sudden, more and more people started showing up and everything slowed down. Very typical. I have lots of friends at companies similar. This is very common, right? What happened was the team was in a room. And then the company was in a room, and then it was in a bigger room, and then it was a slightly bigger room, and then it was a slightly bigger room, then it was the floor of a building, and then all of a sudden, 7 floors of a building in downtown Seattle. And everything that had worked stopped working. And that's when they called me in. There was a couple things. One, I'm not an amazing transformation expert. So there's a couple things. I'm not going to take a company that's really I can't help and try and help them. So there were a few things that I wanted to see. This let me know I could do what I wanted to do. The company had good values. That's super important. Without those core values that are going to support the kind of transformation you want to build, it's never going to happen. And these are our sort of core values. And these are the things that were important to me, the communication, the transparency, embracing change, drive for results, cross-functional collaboration. And these are true values. These are the company lives them, doesn't always do well doing them, but they believe in them. And that was important to me because if I went someplace that didn't have that, this would be a talk about how I failed to bring continuous improvement as opposed to moderately succeeded. The other thing that's easy for me, that might be hard, and it's constantly hard when I talk to other people, I'm senior leadership, I'm the CTO. By virtue of hiring me to come in, and me coming in my interviews and saying this is what I'm going to do if I come in, I had buy-in from senior leadership. Where a lot of folks have trouble is getting that part. So I made it a little easy because I came in at the top. That helped a lot. You can still use a lot of these things. It may take a little bit more convincing, but it's still value. And Agile was already in practice. As I said, I've worked Agile for 17 years now. I'm not going to go someplace where I can't work Agile. And to be honest, I'm not great at doing the Agile transformation. I've just been doing it too long. I hate having to, I've had to bring teams through the Agile transformation. I don't want to have to do that anymore. I'm sorry, I'm too old. Life's too short. So Agile was already in practice. It wasn't great Agile, but at least I didn't have to convince people that Agile in itself was a good thing. So very much like Mamie's talk this morning, I come in as a new leader. Now I need to, this is my goal. I'm going to build a culture of continuous improvement, a garden of continuous improvement, if you will. What's the first thing you do when you're planting a new garden? You clear the space, remove some of the rocks. That was what I started out with by just evaluating the state of the world. Especially coming in as a new person on a team, It's really easy to jump in and start fixing stuff that you see. The problem is that's the symptoms, not the disease. You want to spend some time, get the true, complete picture, find the root causes. So I spent, very much like Mamie, a little bit different. I spent my first really month and a half sitting down with every team in the company and asking them 3 questions. She had 6 questions, I have 3. What's going well, what's not going well, and what can I do to help? The benefit of coming in as a new person, everything that's not going well, not my fault. Everything that's going well, I'm not looking for praise for stuff I've already done. And what can I do to help? You have no idea what I can do, so you're going to assume I can do anything. I'm a Superman. That helped because people were very honest with me about the things that didn't work and the things that did work. Like a true Agilist, I affinity grouped those things, made a backlog, prioritized backlog of all the issues I found. This my wall, went from as high as I could reach on the wall to the floor and back up, so it's a pretty big list. And then I started working through them. Some things I learned from talking to everybody in the company. Poor information flows. Again, you go from 1 floor to 7 floors. It used to be that the CEO could more or less stand up, sitting at his desk, say something, and know the entire company had heard him. And also be relatively sure that they'd heard every discussion up to this decision that he was saying. Now, your 7 floors, information doesn't even travel across 1 floor anymore, let alone from floor to floor. But they didn't know that, and they couldn't figure out why information was not flowing. The organization grew organically, not deliberately. All of a sudden, the organization's growing really fast. Oh, we had 1 team, now the team's big, let's split it into 2 teams. Nobody's thinking about what should the organization look like. So the organization was kind of a mess. Poor WIP management. This is also very common. All these things are very common from companies that had go through these sort of very aggressive growth cycles. You had the senior leadership team being able to more or less kind of get their pet projects into any team. Everybody knew everybody. Company back then was smaller than Dunbar's number, which meant, hey, marketing needs something. I know the developer, I'll just ask him to do this on the website. So they did. And then now you had 6 or 10 teams. People were still doing that. Work was coming in from the side. Teams were getting totally randomized all the time. And bad habits have become encoded into myth. This I've seen at other companies. To be honest, I've never seen it as bad as we had it at Avvo. Do any of you know the 5 monkeys story? Like, okay, Google it. I'm sorry. I'm going to tell it wrong if I tell it, but the idea was this, and this is how it manifested with us. I'm talking to a team, and they tell me, well, we're doing this thing. We have to do this thing, and it's stupid, wastes a lot of time, it's a bad idea, I don't know why we have to do it. And I ask, because I get to ask the dumb questions as the new person, well, why are you doing it? Who tells you to do that? Well, nobody told us to do that. This is just what we're supposed to do. Well, if nobody's telling you to do it that way, well, why are you doing it? That seems kind of counterintuitive. What happens if you change it? Well, we're not supposed to change it. This is the way we do it, right? So nobody could tell me why they were doing things that they knew were bad ideas, but they couldn't stop themselves from doing them anyway. So also common for a lot of these companies, we develop so many silos, and I'll explain why these silos kind of naturally develop in this world in a minute. We had tons of cross-team dependencies, again, because the organization grew organically. We had transparency. Transparency is a true value of the company, but no clarity, because we'd gone from a world where everybody had been party to every discussion that led to a decision. Now, the senior leadership team was having 20 discussions before they make a decision, but nobody else in the company had seen any of them. So they have no context on decisions, and that was causing lots of problems. A bad cycle developed. All these things create a bad cycle, and this is a very, very common cycle I see in companies. Lack of velocity. Things used to be fast, now they're slow. What happened? Why are we so slow all of a sudden? Well, it must be that development teams aren't working hard enough. They used to work much harder. I used to see them working all the time. Now they don't seem to be working as much. Well, I have an idea. Let's kind of force them to be accountable. Let's set a date for delivery of this feature. We want this feature delivered by the end of the quarter. The problem is, it's not that the developers aren't working hard, it's that there's a tremendous amount of dysfunction and poor WIP management and all those things I talked about. So that's really what's causing the slowdown. So they miss the date, because they're working harder, they're still not getting it done. The dates are arbitrary anyway. And then you get back into the cycle. Oh, they missed their dates, they must not be working hard enough. And it just continues to repeat. And what happens when the dev team misses the date that they knew was arbitrary and they had no part in setting because this was trying to force them to be accountable, and it wasn't their fault because of all these other organizational issues, they start pointing fingers, and fingers start pointing around the organization, which creates functional silos, creates team silos. So that was kind of the state of the world. Very common amongst companies that have growth patterns like we did. Next step is setting the conditions. Okay, now we're actually going to furrow or create furrows in the ground and get ready to plant our seeds. So we need some things. I like the idea of myself as leader as more gardener, right? I'm setting the conditions for a good thing to happen. I'm kind of nudging them very gently into the right places, and then hoping good things come from them. So some of the things you need to get the kind of culture we're trying to build is transparency with the clarity. You need context. If you want people to make good decisions, you have to give them the information so they can make good decisions. You need a way to objectively measure, right? If you're improving something, you have to know that you've improved it. You have to be able to measure it. Autonomy. This is super, super important. You can't have continuous improvement. You can't improve anything if you don't have any control over your work, if you don't have the ability to change things, and that ownership of the change once you've got it approved. So these are some of the things that we did to make these things happen, to set the context or to set the right environment for continuous improvement. First of all, making priorities clear. We created the first week I was there, we had a senior leadership team offsite. We were already hearing about this problem of teams. I'd been talking to teams before I even showed up, been hearing this problem of teams being randomized. Nobody knew what the company's priorities were. We put this program in place the very first week I started at Avvo. Does anybody know the Covey Franklin's 4 Disciplines of Execution? Good book. Read that book. WIGS and SWIGS are influenced by that book. WIG stands for Wildly Important Goals. It's essentially, for us, it's a company-level strategy, time boxed to a year. Don't want it too short. If it's too short and we change it, it randomizes, because this is a big-level company strategy. Set by senior leadership team. We have to fight over it. We have to agree to it. We all have to come out of it saying the same things. Very tightly WIP limited. 3 things. You can't really focus on that many things in a year, especially at the big strategic level. Sub-WIGs. In the Covey Franklin, it's PIGs. For pretty important goals, we didn't like calling things PIGs, so we called them sub-WIGs or SWIGs. SWIGs is nicer. You think beer. These are smaller level. These are time boxed much shorter. We try to time box them to a quarter. They're allowed to go to maybe 2 quarters. I'm always trying to push them shorter. My peers are always trying to push them longer. So it's a negotiation. We review these every 6 weeks, so these can change. Not too often. Again, you don't want to randomize folks, but these can change and adapt to changing business conditions. These are very tightly WIP limited, and we made some big mistakes around that, which I'll talk about later. Currently, actually, last quarter we had 4. We actually only have 2 right now. But these are also priority ordered. So everybody knows what the priorities are. And these are cross-team goals. Stuff that can happen within a team are not these things. These are things that require multiple teams or multiple functions in the business to work together. So that's the first program. Second program, we wanted to get people thinking about data and using data in their decision making, but also thinking objectively about how to measure things. So we created, well, and part of this too was to set good context around owning things, right, and being responsible. Dates are weird in Agile. Some people like dates because they're smart. Do X, by Y, right? You achieve it or you don't. I hate dates. I'm not a big fan of dates for date's sake. There are some dates I think are always going to be valid, things that have business impact. So you sign a contract saying you're going to deliver this by date. That's real business impact. That's a real date. In our case, we have a conference we do every year for our customers. We like to show new products at that conference. So that's a date we care about. That's a date we try and hit. But we also know that date in a year in advance. So that helps too. It's not kind of dropped on us. But those have business consequences. I more or less abolished every other date. We don't use dates except for those. But you still want that accountability. So how do you do that? For us, we track metrics, business metrics. In the end, like eNPS is great. There's lots of great ways to try and subjectively measure how people are doing and that kind of things. I like business metrics because in the end, if we're being successful, we're actually growing and improving the business. So we track everything back to true business metrics, and we set up our teams so that they can own business metrics on their own. We stop talking about dates. We start talking about what are we learning? Are we making progress? Are we moving towards our goals? Are we going to improve the metrics with the things that we're doing? So to help the company start thinking about this in these terms, we created a data-driven decision-making framework, which is a very complicated way of saying we made a piece of paper that people can use to document how they make decisions. And this is what we use now company-wide. We taught the entire company to use them. We call them dubs because we're in Seattle. Does anybody get the dub reference? Yes, we would have called them Huskies if we could have made that work. So they're dubs. Dubs is an acronym. It stands for data, understanding, hypotheses, bets, and silent R for results. As I said, I came from Spotify. Spotify had something very similar called DIBS, and you can look that up if you're curious. Henrik Nieberg wrote a blog post about them. Very much came from that, but then I wanted to address some of the things I didn't think worked well in that framework. So we took some other ideas from Kaizen cards and the TPS A3 problem-solving sheets. And this is kind of how it works. So in Confluence, we use Confluence. In Confluence, there's a template, like create a new dub, and it more or less sets the framework up for you. You start with data. You have a problem to solve. You have a question to answer. Well, how do you start making decisions? You start with data. That data is facts. These are incontrovertible facts. No one should be able to argue with these. You are not cherry picking them, things like that. And that's where you start. You start at the top of the page. Here's the data, internal, external, wherever you can find it, as strictly relates to the problem or semi-related to the problem. From the data, you interpret the data. Okay, so this is your understandings. It's your interpretation of the data. This should also be semi-incontrovertible, right? You shouldn't be able to argue with these. Like, one should clearly follow from the other. You can't say, the sky is blue and grass is green, therefore mountains are purple. My understanding is mountains are purple, because that doesn't follow from the data. Based on that, you have your hypothesis. Given our interpretation of the data, this is what we think we should do. This is what we suggest to do. Now, this is where you can have real debate. And when people review or when teams look at these, this is where the debate starts to happen. It isn't clear from our interpretation of the data that this is what we should do. Let's have a discussion of it. We follow that with bets. These are the things we're going to try to prove or disprove each of these hypotheses. Right? So these are the actions we're going to take. And then finally, the results. These are the results of the bets. Right? It's a very simple framework. To be honest, we had to train people on it. We trained the whole company on it. We had things like dub office hours where people could come and like get help finding the data they needed. That turned out to be scary for people until they learned like you don't need to be a PhD in data science to actually get the data you need. But once we taught everybody how to use it, it took off like wildfire. And you just see them constantly being created. And it's awesome because, as I said, these go into Confluence, which means you have a library that's accessible to the whole company, which means every decision that gets made that goes through this format is completely documented. And people that start today can go, why do we do this thing? This seems crazy. We'll go look at the dub. Oh, well, I still think it's crazy, but now I get why we do it, right? And maybe they say, well, maybe we shouldn't do it anymore. Let's write a new dub. Autonomy. This was, I'll talk more about the rollout of this program. This was probably one of the hardest things. But again, this was super critical to getting that culture of continuous improvement. We created something we call journey teams. Journey around customer journey, customer internal or external journey. These are truly cross-functional. These are multiple team autonomous organizations. So they can have like one Scrum team in them. They can have three. The biggest one has 3 Scrum teams in it right now. Big enough to drive efforts independently, but truly cross-functional. Not just test, UX, dev, product, but also data and data engineering, data analytics, marketing, sales. These are true cross-functional teams. Finance, one of them supports the business. Finance people that they work with are part of that team. They go to stand-ups, they go to planning, they do the whole thing. That was important because these teams can't be truly autonomous unless they have that, unless they can actually make decisions that affect not only how they work, but how the company operates. Each of them has a set of metrics they uniquely own. Each team has metrics they uniquely own for the business, which means that that is a very objective measure of whether they're achieving what their missions. Those metrics are approved by a senior leadership team, so they know, the leadership team knows who's driving what metric, and if that metric is moving in the right direction. That's important as well. And this has become now, in our company, this is our sort of primary unit of execution. Like everything happens in the journey teams. Occasionally we'll hire like a new marketing person from some other company and they'll say, well, my company, like I had a little dev team that just kind of did my SEO for me and I'd really like a little dev team to do my SEO for me. And the answer is no, go join the journey team and try and convince them that your SEO stuff's important. But you're gonna do it, if you wanna do it, it's gonna go through the journey team. These are some of the goals we had. This is just general good, like autonomous team type goals. Now we've kind of created the furrows, we've amended the soil, we've removed some of the rocks. Now we kind of start planting the seeds of actual driving continuous improvement. This is actually, what you'll find is if you've done some of those other things and however you choose to do them in your company, the rest actually gets easier and easier. Each stage of these gets easier. For us, part of it was taking organizational change out of my hands and my peers' hands and pushing it into the organization itself. We guide rather than I come and tell people what to do. We created an RFC process. I created this at Spotify. We use it at Spotify. It worked really, really well. I brought this forward to Avvo and continue to iterate and improve upon it. So organizational leadership, that could be really that's anybody, identifies an issue. So one of the things we're going through this process right now is interviewing. Somebody noticed, hey, the way we interview, we're probably not removing bias enough. We could probably be removing more bias in it. So let's create a dub around that. How do we know if we have bias or not? How do we know if we've reduced bias or not? What's the information from the industry around how to do that? Okay, what are your hypotheses and your bets? Seems like a good idea, let's try it out. A cross-functional group comes together, representing different parts of the organization that are affected. They basically produce a document. This is what we think we should do differently moving forward. Now this is gonna affect everybody. Like we're doing this for a couple different things that literally affect how everybody works. So everybody needs to have input into this because it's going to change their day-to-day lives. So they have this document. Maybe they'll do a brown bag, to kind of introduce it, and then they publish it as an RFC, and they spend some time collecting comments on it. This is just a normal RFC process. People comment, they question, they challenge. Team comes back around, incorporates those, does another rev. We do this in Google Docs. It's awesome because you can see every change, every comment, everyone can see everybody else's work. That helps a lot. We do a few iterations on this till we reach rough consensus. You're never going to reach exact consensus. Close enough is good enough. And then it becomes law, I guess. The team that formulated it owns the rollout. And part of the document has to be, this is how we maintain it after it's rolled out. Because you don't want to keep that team driving this forever. You want to find a home for it. Sometimes that home is me, sometimes that home is HR, whatever. So now we get to the good stuff. Now everything's set. Everything's working great, theoretically. Now we do the continuous improvement, like step 3, underwear. Profit. Retrospectives everywhere. This is the easiest trick in the book, and this is a great way to do this. We do retrospectives on everything, literally everything. So it's not just you have retrospectives in your Scrum ceremonies at the end of a sprint. Everything I just described had big retrospectives at the end of it, and some had them along the way, the longer projects. What are we doing? Like when is the retrospective? Everybody got sick and tired of hearing me say, like, oh, that speaker you brought in, that person was awesome. When's the retrospective? I'd love to hear what we're going to do to get more people like that in, or what we did wrong that we're going to do better next time. So in companies, we tend to do 2 kinds of retrospectives. We do the Agile ones, right? That's just part of the team and very localized. And then we do maybe the bigger ones, which are usually postmortems and are all about assigning blame for failure. If you do a true, like we do retrospectives for everything, we take everything as an opportunity to learn and improve, and you have people just constantly asking. I love to see the retrospective notes on this. That changes how people think about it, and it changes how they act. You ask the normal things that you'd ask in a retrospective, but you focus on this last bullet. What concrete actions will we take from this for future projects? Totally different things, right? What are we going to learn about how we can do things better? And then you put them in a place that everyone can find them. Super important. It drives me nutty when teams will have learned something really valuable and they send out the notes within the team so everybody in the team knows and nobody else knows. You put them in a place where everyone can find them. Because you will learn over time what works well in your company and what doesn't work well, right? Oh, this project, like the dev team did what they thought they were supposed to do and everything, and the marketing came in way too late, and that caused the project to flounder, requirements change. Oh, next time, let's bring marketing in earlier, right? If that happened to team A and they know about it, but team B doesn't know anything about it, guess what? Team B is going to have the same problem. Sure. Yeah. I'm almost done. I'm going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. Okay. Sorry. I'm this close. And if we'd started earlier, I would go like, all right, let's do it. But I'm almost done. So let's take that again in a couple minutes. So everything I described hopefully sounds awesome. How did it actually work? Right? I can tell you we invented butterfly methods, or I don't know, I could just make stuff up. The important point is not only what did we do, but how did it work? And what did we do wrong? And what should you watch out for? What did we learn in our retrospectives? One thing that's important to see is the calendar that we rolled some of these programs out. The retrospective everywhere thing was going on the whole time. RFCs, started somewhere in there. This is an actual month-by-month calendar, June 2016 there and September 2017 here. One thing you'll notice, a whole bunch of stuff, then not a lot. There's a reason for it. If you go through your change curves, it's a lot of change happening pretty quick. And that we learned a lesson on. We knew it was going to happen, like you know it's going to happen. But there was so much to do, we just couldn't stop ourselves from doing these programs. And what happened is when we really hit journey teams, basically we blew out everybody's change budget and they were busted for a while. And we had to say, we're going to stop and just digest this and get this going well before we do anything new. And now, honestly, we're starting to, teams are actually working pretty well. All these programs are working well, and we're just starting to think about what we might do next. But that was definitely a lesson. If you haven't heard that one before, manage your change curves. Because each one of these affects people. And they can change, but especially as they're learning to be more malleable, more nimble, it's hard. So a lot of this year has really been like, let's just get this all working really well. The WIG and SWIG process, this was interesting. So I came in, as I said, this is like the first week I was at Avvo and proposed this process to solve a very concrete problem we had. So the senior leadership team had tons of pet projects. They were used to just shoving them into teams. I said, no, we can't do that. We have to be really clear. Let's make a prioritized list. Let's whip limit it. Okay, let's do 10 things. No, 10 things is way too many. Let's do 5 things. We compromised at 7. Okay, so all right, let's keep them to a month, or let's keep them to 3 months. 3 months is too short. We need bigger time. No, let's try, 6 months. Okay, so our first 7 more or less came out of the heads of the senior leadership team. They were all the senior leadership team's pet projects. The arguments that we had were really, really valuable, and having that prioritized list was valuable, but we completely swamped the organization. 7 was way too many, surprisingly. We ended up completing 4, and we blew out the whole organization to do 4. It was painful. So we learned, and we iterated. When we started this year, we said, okay, we're going to do it, instead of just coming out of the senior leadership team's head, because part of the problem there, not enough context for the organization to understand why we were doing these 7 things. We said instead, we're going to source from the organization. We're going to do this bottoms up. Everyone submit your dubs. Let's build a set of dubs. We got 60 dubs from the organization proposing SWIGs. We kind of grouped them together in tranches, and we ended up with 4 SWIGs. This worked much better. We completed all 4, which is good. The problem was we again blew out the organization. The organization basically did nothing but these SWIGs and was not happy about it, because this was also when we introduced journey teams. They had missions they wanted to achieve, and essentially we stole their missions, right? We were way too top down. The latest iteration, which we're just completing this month, we actually have gotten way better at it, partially because we were blown out the organization too much for like literally the last 9 months. We stepped way back. We said we're going to do 2. Okay, we're going to give everybody time. We're going to do 2. These were created both by sort of SLT, but soliciting specific dubs from the organization, because when you get 60 dubs or 60 proposals from the organization for change and you pick 10 of them, 50 people are pretty disappointed. And that was something we weren't real happy about. So this time we kind of more directed, like, this is what we think is important, give us some ideas around this. This has worked a lot better. We're 2.5 months in. 1 is basically done. The other one's almost done. We'll be pretty good with this. I think next time we're going to revisit in the beginning of October. We'll probably end up with maybe 3. I think that may be the good number. But again, iteration and improvement. The dub process itself actually worked out the best. I think this was, to be honest, a big part of this was that somebody else besides me owned the rollout of this. I'm really good at thinking of things. I'm not always great at rolling them out. But she did an amazing job just training the entire company on this. And so this is from Confluence. We have 16 pages of dubs from the organization. That in itself is pretty successful. And you can see some of the things we do, some of the things that we've had in the dub process. Journey teams were tough. And it wasn't tough because it was that big a change from what we'd done before. It was a bit of a change. And it wasn't tough from the ways you think about it, where marketing was like, we don't want to be we don't want to have to talk to developers or anything like that. It was tough in that one of the important parts of this was that we'd had 12 small teams before. We turned them into 6 bigger teams. And we'd had a lot of stuff that was unowned. Stuff that had been built and kind of nobody owned anymore. Part of the requirements of the journey teams was that each of these teams, everything has to be owned by somebody. Which meant that each of these teams now took on a much bigger scope than they were used to and had to spend a lot of time figuring out that scope. The team spent a tremendous amount of time in the forming and norming stages. So we lost some time there. But now we're coming out the other side of that change curve, and that plus blowing out the change budget, coming out the other side of the curve now, and those teams are starting to work actually quite well. We now agree that we're better than we were before, but it took a long time to get there. So I'm going to do questions in just a second, but just to sum up with clear priorities, removal of artificial cadences, metrics-driven autonomous teams, data-driven decision-making, organizational ownership of organizational change, a practice of retrospectives, and an archive of the learnings, business word, from those retrospectives. This kind of horrible cycle turns into a much better, the classic learn, measure, or build, measure, learn loop. And in fact, you can even start improving at each stage of this. And this is just where we're really starting to get to now, which has been a really nice transformation. We still have a ways to go, but it's definitely going in a very good direction. So I'll do your questions. If for whatever reason you missed me today, this is obviously Twitter. You can tweet questions at me. And actually, if you don't mind, this is the second time I've given, this is a new version of this talk I've given before. This is the second time I've given it. I would always like to be able to improve on this talk. There's a very short survey you can answer. You can tell me how I can improve this talk. Okay, I'll take questions now. To your question, can you repeat it? Sorry.